My husband kicked me and my 4-year-old son out for his mother. He had no idea what was going to happen in court. My name is Malian, I'm 28 years old, and the night my husband kicked me and our 4-year-old son out of our home because he listened to his mother, I honestly thought my life was over. His mother believed she had finally won. My husband believed I had lost everything. But neither of them knew that I was eventually going to walk into a courtroom with a lawyer, a file of evidence I had quietly collected, and information they had never expected me to have. And when the court date finally arrived, my husband walked in beside his mother looking completely confident. He thought I was there because I wanted him back. He had no idea why I was really there. To understand how I ended up sitting in that courtroom, I have to go back to the night everything fell apart. It was late. Our son was already in his pajamas, sitting on the living room floor with his favorite stuffed toy tucked under one arm. He was 4 years old, and at that age, he had a very simple understanding of the world. Daddy came home. Mommy made dinner. We lived in our house. At night, he went to bed. That was his world. And I was about to watch that world change in a matter of minutes. My husband had been acting differently for weeks. He was quieter, more distant. He spent more time talking to his mother. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he told me nothing. Everything is fine. But everything wasn't fine. His mother had become more involved in our marriage than I ever thought she would. She had opinions about almost everything. How I handled our son. How I managed our home. How I spoke to my husband. What decisions we made. What we spent money on. At first, I tried to be patient. She was his mother. I understood that. I didn't want to create a fight between them. I never wanted my husband to feel like he had to choose between his wife and his mother. So when his mother criticized me, I usually stayed quiet. When she questioned my decisions, I tried to explain. When she made comments that hurt, I told myself not to take them personally. But eventually, it became clear that she didn't just want to have an opinion. She wanted control, and she wanted my husband to listen to her. I could feel it happening slowly. She would tell him something. He would come home and question me about it. She would suggest that I was doing something wrong. He would suddenly think I was doing something wrong. If she said I was too protective of our son, my husband would tell me I needed to relax. If she said I was too independent, he would tell me that marriage meant making different choices. If she said something about our home, suddenly he had concerns about the home too. It became exhausting, but I kept trying, because I loved my husband, and because I loved my son more than anything in the world. I kept thinking there would be a moment when my husband would finally see what was happening. I kept thinking he would realize that his mother was pushing us apart. I was wrong. That night, when my husband came home, I knew immediately something was different. He walked through the door without saying much. I looked at him. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. He put his things down. Then he looked at me. "We need to talk." Those words made my stomach tighten. "About what?" He hesitated. "About this marriage." I stared at him. "What about it?" He looked uncomfortable. "My mother thinks we need to separate." I almost couldn't believe what I'd heard. "Your mother thinks we need to separate?" "She thinks things aren't working." I took a breath. "What do you think?" He didn't answer. That silence told me more than his words could have. "You agree with her?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's not that simple." "It seems pretty simple." "Lalian." "No, I want you to answer me." He looked at me. "I think we need some time apart." I felt my chest tighten. "For how long?" "I don't know." "Where am I supposed to go?" He looked away. "You and our son can stay somewhere for a while." I stared at him. "You're asking me to leave?" "Yes. And our son." "He can go with you." I couldn't believe it. "You're kicking both of us out?" "I'm not kicking you out. You just told me to leave." "I think it's better this way." "For who?" He didn't answer. I looked toward the living room. Our son was still playing. He hadn't heard everything. I lowered my voice. "Does your mother know you're doing this?" He hesitated. "Yes." That was when my heart sank. She knew. This wasn't something my husband had suddenly decided on his own. She had been pushing him toward it. And now he was doing exactly what she wanted. I asked him one more question. Do you really want us to leave? He looked at me. I think it's what needs to happen. I nodded slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call his mother and demand an explanation. I didn't beg. I just stood there trying to understand how the man I had married could look at our 4-year-old son and decide that sending him away was acceptable. Then our son looked up. Mommy? I turned toward him. Yes, sweetheart? He held up his stuffed toy. Daddy's home. I know. He looked at his father, then back at me. Something about his expression told me he knew something was wrong. Children notice more than adults think. He stood up and walked toward us. Daddy? My husband crouched down. What, buddy? Our son looked at him. Are you mad? No. Then why are Mommy and me leaving? My husband looked at me. I could see the discomfort on his face. He didn't know what to say. Our son waited. Daddy? My husband finally said, You and Mommy are going to stay somewhere else for a little while. Our son frowned. Why? Because grown-ups need some time. He looked confused. Are you coming? My husband didn't answer. Our son asked again. Daddy, aren't you coming with us? My husband shook his head. No, buddy. Our son's face fell. But why? I couldn't watch it anymore. I walked over and took my son's hand. Come on, sweetheart. Where are we going? We'll figure it out. Can I bring him? He held up his stuffed toy. Yes. He hugged it against his chest. I looked at my husband one last time. Are you really doing this? He said nothing. That silence was my answer. I took my son's hand. We went to gather a few things. I packed clothes, his pajamas, his toothbrush, some things he would need. I didn't even know where we were going to sleep that night. I just knew we couldn't stay. My son followed me from room to room. Mommy? Yes? Are we coming back tomorrow? I stopped. I wanted to tell him, yes. I wanted to promise him that everything would be normal again, but I couldn't lie to him. I don't know. He looked at me. Did I do something? My heart broke. No. Is Daddy mad at me? No. Sweetheart. Then why do we have to go? I knelt down in front of him. Because sometimes grown-ups make decisions that children don't understand. He nodded slowly. I hugged him. This is not your fault. He hugged his stuffed toy between us. I stood up. My husband was still there, watching. I looked at him. There was still a part of me that hoped he would stop this. I wanted him to say, wait. I wanted him to say he had made a mistake. I wanted him to look at our son and realize what he was doing. He didn't. So I took my son's hand, and we walked out. The door closed behind us. I remember standing outside for a second, with my son's small hand inside mine. He looked back at the house. Daddy is inside. Yes. Are we going somewhere else? Yes. Where? I swallowed. Somewhere safe. That night, I barely slept. My son eventually fell asleep. I stayed awake thinking about what had happened. I kept replaying the conversation, the words, the silence. The way my husband had said our son could leave with me, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. And then I thought about his mother. She had wanted me out. Now I was gone. She probably believed she had won. Maybe she thought my husband would eventually move on. Maybe she thought I would come back begging. Maybe she thought I had nothing. But the next morning, I made a decision. I was not going to beg my husband to take me back. I was not going to call his mother. I was not going to stand outside that house asking them to let me return. I had a child to protect. So, I hired a lawyer. I walked into the lawyer's office, carrying everything I had quietly kept. Messages, documents, financial records, other records that I had saved over time. I hadn't collected them because I was planning some kind of revenge. I had simply learned that when things become serious, having proof matters. My lawyer listened while I explained what had happened. He asked questions. I answered them. He looked through the messages, then the financial records, then the other documents. At first, his expression didn't change. But the longer he read, the more serious he became. He turned one page, then another. He looked at me. Lilian, yes. How long have you had these? Some of them for quite a while. And your husband knows you have them? I shook my head. No. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said something that I didn't expect. Good. Don't tell him yet. I stared at him. Why? Because I want to understand exactly what we're looking at before anyone knows what you have. I looked down at the folder. What do you think it means? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he went back through the documents. Finally, he said, if these records prove what I think they may prove, your husband is going to have serious questions to answer in court. My heart started beating faster. What kind of questions? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He closed the folder. Right now, our job is to protect you and your son. He nodded. That became my focus. Not revenge, not getting even. Protection. I followed his instructions. I gave him what he needed. I organized everything. I didn't tell my husband what I had. And I didn't tell his mother either. They both seemed to believe I had been left with nothing. My husband barely contacted me. When he did, the conversations were cold and careful. He seemed convinced that I would eventually come back. At one point, he asked whether I had thought about what I was going to do. I told him I was taking care of our son. He didn't seem concerned. That hurt. Because I was expecting him to ask how our child was doing. Instead, he seemed more interested in whether I was ready to accept what had happened. His mother was even more confident. She believed she had successfully removed me from her son's life. She didn't say it directly. She didn't need to. I could hear it in the way she spoke. She believed I had lost. She believed my husband had chosen her. And she believed I had no way to fight back. I stayed quiet. I let her believe it, not because I wanted to trick her, because my lawyer had told me not to reveal what we were preparing. As the weeks passed, the case moved forward. There were documents to review, meetings, questions, more records. Sometimes I felt overwhelmed. There were nights when my son asked when Daddy was coming. I didn't know what to tell him. I never wanted him to think he had done something wrong. So I kept telling him the same thing. You didn't do anything. He would nod. Then he'd go back to his toy. Sometimes I watched him play and wondered how adults could make decisions that changed a child's whole world. He didn't understand the arguments. He didn't understand his grandmother's influence. He didn't understand court. He just knew that Daddy wasn't there. That was enough to break my heart. But I kept going. I became more organized, more careful, more focused. I learned that being strong didn't mean never crying. Sometimes I cried after my son went to sleep. Sometimes I sat alone and wondered how my marriage had reached this point. But every morning, I got up. I took care of my son. I followed my lawyer's advice. And I kept moving forward. Then, the court date was set. The closer it came, the more nervous I became. I didn't know what the judge would think. I didn't know how my husband would react. I didn't know exactly what would happen once the evidence was presented. But I knew I was prepared. My lawyer had reviewed everything. He knew what we had, and he still hadn't told me to reveal the details to anyone. So I stayed quiet. My husband, meanwhile, seemed completely confident. He believed I wanted my family back. He believed I would eventually give up. He believed I had been pushed out of the house and had lost control of the situation. He didn't know what was in my file. His mother didn't know either. The morning of court, I dressed simply. I didn't want to make a statement with what I wore. I just wanted to get through the day. Before leaving, I looked at my son. He was still too young to understand what was happening. I kissed his forehead. I love you. I love you too, Mommy. Then I left. My lawyer met me before we entered the courtroom. He had the evidence with him, a thick file. I looked at it. Are you sure? He looked at me. We're ready. He nodded. Then we walked inside. And that's when I saw my husband. He came in with his mother. She looked confident, almost satisfied. My husband looked calm. He glanced across the courtroom and saw me. For a moment, our eyes met. I could almost hear the question in his expression. Why are you here? He seemed to expect me to be emotional. He seemed to expect me to want him back. Maybe he thought I would ask him to take me home. Maybe his mother had convinced him that I had nowhere else to turn. But I wasn't sitting there begging. I was sitting beside my lawyer, with my evidence, waiting. The hearing began. The judge reviewed the basic information. My hands were cold. My lawyer leaned toward me. Stay calm. I am. You're doing fine. Across the room, my husband spoke quietly with his attorney. His mother leaned toward him and whispered something. He nodded. They looked completely confident. And for a few minutes, nothing happened that would have made anyone watching understand why I was calm. Then the judge began asking questions about what had happened. My husband answered. I listened. My lawyer listened. The judge reviewed some of the documents already submitted. Then she looked toward my lawyer. He stood. Your Honor, there are additional records we'd like the court to consider. My husband's expression changed slightly. His mother sat up straighter. The judge accepted the documents. She began looking through them. Page by page. Her expression became more focused. My husband looked at me. I didn't look away. He seemed confused, then concerned. His mother whispered something to him. He shook his head. The judge turned another page. Then another. My lawyer remained standing. The courtroom became very quiet. The judge looked at one particular document for a long moment. Then she raised her eyes. First toward my lawyer. Then toward my husband. My husband shifted in his seat. For the first time since he'd walked into that courtroom, he no longer looked confident. The judge placed the document in front of her. She looked directly at him. Hey, mister. He straightened. Yes, Your Honor? The judge glanced down at the evidence again. Then she said, Before we proceed, I need you to answer one very important question. The courtroom went completely silent. My husband straightened in his chair. His mother stopped whispering. Even I felt my heartbeat change. The judge looked directly at my husband. Did you know that your wife had been keeping records of the financial arrangements surrounding your household? My husband frowned. I don't understand. The judge looked at the document in front of her. I'm asking whether you were aware of these records. He glanced toward his attorney. Then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. His mother shifted beside him. I kept my hands folded in my lap. My lawyer didn't move. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. She turned toward my lawyer. Counselor? My lawyer stood. Your Honor, these records show that Malyan has been documenting the financial circumstances of the household for some time. They include payments, transfers, expenses, and communications concerning decisions made by my client's husband and his mother. My husband's face changed. His mother looked at him. What is he talking about? My husband didn't answer her. The judge looked at the papers again. Mister, were you aware that your wife had documentation concerning these matters? No. Were you aware that she had retained copies of financial records? No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Then we'll proceed carefully. My lawyer opened the file. This is not simply a dispute between a husband and wife. The court is being asked to consider the circumstances under which my client and her 4-year-old son were removed from their home, the financial responsibilities each party had been carrying, and the decisions made by the parties before and after the separation. I could feel my husband's eyes on me. For the first time, he looked less certain. He leaned slightly toward his attorney. His attorney whispered something to him. My husband shook his head. I looked down. I didn't feel victorious. He felt sad, because I knew exactly how we had gotten there. There had been a time when I would have done anything to avoid sitting across from my husband in a courtroom. I had wanted our family to stay together. I had wanted our son to have both parents under the same roof. I had wanted my husband to understand that his mother was creating a problem between us. But he hadn't listened, and now we were here. The judge looked at my lawyer. Please explain the significance of the documents. My lawyer nodded. Certainly, Your Honor. He picked up the first group of papers. These records show expenses Malyan paid during the marriage and after the separation. They also show communications concerning household expenses and decisions that were being made without her knowledge or agreement. My husband's attorney interrupted. Your Honor, I object to the characterization. The judge looked at him. On what basis? We haven't had sufficient opportunity to address every document. The judge nodded. Then you will have an opportunity. The room became quiet again. My lawyer continued. We're not asking the court to make assumptions. We're asking the court to review the records. The judge turned toward my husband. That's exactly what we'll do. My husband looked down. His mother leaned toward him. What did she give them? He whispered, I don't know. She looked at me. For a second, I saw the same confidence she'd had when she watched us leave the house. But it wasn't there anymore. She looked worried. My lawyer turned to another section of the file. This next set of records concerns communications between the parties. My stomach tightened. These were the messages I'd saved. Not because I had known this day would come. Because I had learned to save things when conversations became complicated. There were messages where my husband's mother had criticized me. Messages where she told my husband that our marriage would be better without me. Messages where my husband had repeated things she had said. Messages where I had asked him to stop allowing his mother to interfere. And messages where he had told me, more than once, that I was making the situation worse by resisting her. The messages weren't dramatic. That was what made them powerful. There were no wild threats. No movie-style confessions. Just ordinary words. Words people type when they think nobody else will ever read them. My lawyer handed copies to the judge. She read them quietly. My husband watched her face. Then she looked up. Mister, did you make these statements? He looked at the pages. I don't remember. My lawyer immediately said, we have records showing the account from which the messages were sent. My husband swallowed. His attorney leaned toward him. Just answer the question. My husband looked at the judge. Yes. The judge nodded. And these communications were made before your wife and son left the home? Yes. Were you discussing separating from your wife at the time? Yes. Were you discussing this with your mother? He hesitated. Yes. His mother suddenly spoke. I was trying to help my son. The judge looked toward her. Ma'am, unless you are asked to speak, please allow the attorneys to address the court. His mother sat back. I watched her face. She looked smaller than she had when we left the house. My lawyer continued. Your Honor, one of the important issues here is that Malyan did not simply leave the home voluntarily. She was instructed by her husband to leave with their 4-year-old child. The judge looked at my husband. Is that accurate? My husband shifted. We were having problems. That wasn't my question. He looked down. Yes. You told your wife to leave? Yes. And your son left with her? Yes. The judge made a note. Did you offer alternative housing? No. Financial support? He hesitated. Not immediately. My chest tightened. Not immediately. That was how he described it. As if the three of us had simply changed apartments. My lawyer looked at me. I kept my expression calm. The judge continued asking questions. What was your intention when you told them to leave? My husband rubbed his hands together. I thought we needed time apart. Did you believe your wife would return? I didn't know. Did you discuss this decision with your mother? Yes. His mother looked at him sharply. He didn't look back. The judge turned to another document. And these communications indicate that your mother was encouraging you to proceed with the separation. My husband didn't answer. His attorney looked uncomfortable. Finally, my husband said, she was giving me advice. My lawyer replied, advice that included telling him that his wife needed to be removed from the household. His mother's face hardened. I never said anything like that. My lawyer didn't argue with her. Instead, he held up a printed message. Your Honor, the record speaks for itself. The judge read it. She didn't react dramatically. She simply placed it down. That somehow made the moment more serious. My husband's mother looked at me. I didn't look away. I wasn't angry at her anymore. At least, not the way I had been before. I had spent years wondering how she could look at me and see an enemy. Now I understood that I couldn't change what she believed. I could only decide what I would accept. The judge moved to the financial records. This is where I need clarification. My lawyer nodded. These records show that Malyan contributed significantly to household expenses. They also show that she maintained records of payments made on behalf of the household. My husband looked confused. I paid bills too. My lawyer nodded. We're not saying you paid nothing. The judge looked at him. This isn't about who paid every single dollar. She looked at both attorneys. The issue is whether the financial history being presented changes the court's understanding of the parties' circumstances. My lawyer nodded. Exactly. He handed over another group of documents. The judge looked through them. My husband watched. Then his expression changed. I knew what he had seen. The documents showed the things I had quietly kept. Payments, receipts, records, expenses. Things that had happened inside our household that my husband apparently believed I would never bring into court. He leaned toward his attorney. I didn't know she kept all that. His attorney answered quietly. I understand. His mother heard him. She looked at me. You were keeping records against us. I finally spoke. No. She stared at me. Then why? I looked at her. Because they were my records. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was simply answering. The judge looked toward me. Malian, is there anything you want the court to understand about why you kept these records? My lawyer looked at me. I took a breath. Yes. The judge nodded. You may speak. I looked at my husband. I didn't keep them because I was planning to leave. He stared at me. I kept them because I wanted to understand what was happening. I paused. When things started becoming difficult, I didn't know who to believe anymore. Conversations would happen, and then later people would remember them differently, so I started keeping copies of things. My voice shook slightly. I never expected to use them in court. The judge listened. I just wanted to know the truth. My husband looked down. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the judge asked, and when you were told to leave? I swallowed. I was shocked. Did you believe you had any choice? I looked at my hands. No. The judge nodded. And your son? He was 4. My voice became quieter. He didn't understand why he had to leave. The room was silent. I remembered his little hand inside mine. I remembered him holding his stuffed toy. I remembered him asking whether his father was coming with us. I had tried not to cry that night. I didn't succeed. The judge gave me a moment. Then she looked toward my husband. Did your son ask why he had to leave? My husband looked down. Yes. What did you tell him? I told him he and his mother needed to stay somewhere else. The judge stared at him. For how long? I didn't know. That answer said everything. My son hadn't understood any of it, and neither had I. The hearing continued. My lawyer presented the records. My husband's attorney asked questions. Some were fair, some were difficult. I answered honestly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't try to make my husband look worse than he had made himself look. When I didn't know something, I said I didn't know. When something was my mistake, I admitted it. I didn't need to invent anything. The truth was enough. Eventually, the judge turned to my husband. I want to be very clear about something. He looked up. You are entitled to disagree with your wife. You are entitled to seek separation. You are entitled to make decisions about your marriage. My husband nodded. But when there is a 4-year-old child involved, the court is going to focus on the child's stability and welfare. He nodded again. And that means decisions cannot simply be made based on one spouse's wishes or pressure from extended family. My husband's mother stiffened. The judge continued. The evidence before me raises concerns about the circumstances surrounding the separation. My heart pounded. My husband looked toward his attorney. The judge reviewed the documents again. Then she addressed the immediate issue. She issued temporary orders concerning my son and me. The details were more complicated than anything I could explain in a Reddit post, but the important thing was simple. My son would have stability. I would not be left without support while the case continued. And my husband would have responsibilities that he could no longer ignore. He looked stunned. His mother looked even more stunned. The judge wasn't finished. She made it clear that the court would continue reviewing the financial evidence and communications that had been submitted. The final decisions would come later. But the confidence my husband had walked into the courtroom with was gone. Completely gone. After the hearing, he approached me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You had all that?" I looked at him. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When would you have listened?" He looked down. I didn't say anything else. He swallowed. "I didn't know." "I know." His eyes became wet. "I thought you were trying to punish me." I wasn't. Then what were you doing? Protecting our son. That silenced him. His mother stood a few feet away. She looked angry, then embarrassed, then simply tired. She finally walked over. Malian. I looked at her. She hesitated. For years she had always known what to say. That day, she didn't. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I answered quietly. Neither did I. She looked at my husband, then at me. I was trying to help my son. I know, but I thought you were hurting him. I took a breath. I know that's what you believed. She looked away. I wasn't going to argue with her in a courthouse hallway. There was nothing left to prove. My husband looked at me again. Can we talk? Not today. He nodded. I could tell he wanted to say more. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Maybe he wanted me to reassure him. But I wasn't ready. I had spent too much time making everyone else comfortable. That day, I needed to take care of myself and my son. The weeks after the hearing were difficult. Nothing magically became easy. Court didn't erase what happened. My son still asked questions. Sometimes he asked when Daddy would come. Sometimes he wanted to know whether we would live in our old home again. I answered honestly, without putting adult problems on his shoulders. One evening, he sat beside me holding his stuffed dog. Mommy? Yes. Is Daddy still my daddy? I felt tears come to my eyes. Yes. Even if he doesn't live with us? Yes. He thought about that. Okay. Then he leaned against me. That was enough. As the legal process continued, my husband slowly began to understand what he had done. Not just the legal consequences. The emotional ones. He had believed his mother was protecting him. He eventually realized that by refusing to stand up for his wife, he had allowed his marriage to collapse. And by sending his 4-year-old son away, he had made a decision his child had never asked him to make. He told me once during one of our later conversations, I kept telling myself I was avoiding conflict. I listened. He continued, but I was really choosing the easiest person to disappoint. I didn't answer immediately. Who was that? He looked at me. You, he nodded. And our son. He looked down. Yes. That was the first time I felt that he truly understood. Not because he was crying, not because he was afraid of the court, because he finally admitted that his silence had been a choice. His mother had influenced him, but she hadn't forced every decision. He had made them. That mattered to me. Eventually, he also understood something else. I had never been powerless. I had simply been quiet. There is a difference. I had spent years trying to preserve my family. I had tolerated things I shouldn't have tolerated. I had stayed silent during arguments because I didn't want my son growing up around constant fighting. I had tried to keep peace. But peace without respect isn't really peace. It's just silence. And I had been silent for too long. The court process continued until the arrangements became clearer and more stable. My son was protected. My responsibilities became clearer. My husband's responsibilities became clearer too. There was no dramatic movie ending. Nobody was dragged away in handcuffs. Nobody screamed in the hallway. There was simply a family forced to confront the consequences of decisions that had been made when everyone thought there would be no consequences. My husband eventually apologized. Not once. More than once. But the difference was that the apologies were no longer demands for forgiveness. He didn't say, I'm sorry, so you need to come back. He said, I'm sorry because I understand what I did. That meant something. It didn't erase anything, but it mattered. As for his mother, our relationship changed permanently. There was no sudden reconciliation, no emotional hug, no pretending that the past hadn't happened. She eventually understood that she had pushed her son toward a decision that hurt his own family. Whether she admitted all of it out loud didn't matter as much to me as it once had. I no longer needed her approval. That was one of the biggest changes in me. I had spent years wondering whether she liked me, whether she respected me, whether she thought I was good enough for her son. I stopped asking those questions. My worth wasn't something she got to decide. And my son deserved to grow up seeing his mother understand that. One night, months after everything began, my son was sitting beside me on the couch. He had his stuffed dog tucked under his arm. He looked at me.
Mommy? Yes. Are we okay?
I smiled.
Yes.
He leaned against me.
Good.
Then he went back to watching his show. I sat there quietly. For the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like fear. It felt like peace. I thought about the woman who had walked out of that house, holding her 4-year-old son's hand. She had been terrified. She had thought she had lost everything. But she had not lost everything. She had lost a marriage that had already become something she could no longer recognize. She had lost the illusion that staying quiet could keep everyone happy. She had lost the belief that loving someone meant accepting whatever they did to you. But she had found something too. She had found her voice. She had found the courage to protect her son. And she had learned that sometimes the strongest response isn't screaming. It isn't revenge. It isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's simply refusing to keep participating in something that is hurting you. My husband once thought I had been left with nothing when he told me to walk out that door. His mother thought she had won. They both misunderstood what they were looking at. I wasn't a woman who had nothing. I was a woman who had finally stopped giving everything away just to keep other people comfortable. And the courtroom didn't give me my dignity. It didn't create my strength. It simply gave me a place where the truth could finally be heard. The last time my son asked me whether we were going to be okay, I hugged him and told him yes. This time, I believed it. Because I finally understood something I wish I had understood 3 years earlier. A family isn't held together by one person constantly swallowing her pain. A family is held together when the people inside it choose each other, with love, respect, and responsibility. And if someone asks you to destroy yourself just to keep the family together, that's not keeping a family together. That's losing yourself. I wasn't going to do that anymore, not for my husband's approval. Not for his mother's approval, and not even for the memory of the marriage I had once hoped we would have. I was going to build something different, something quieter, something healthier, something my son could grow up in, without ever wondering whether love meant allowing someone else to hurt you. And when I looked at him sleeping peacefully that night, his stuffed dog beside him, I realized that the woman who had walked out of that house scared and heartbroken was still me. But she wasn't the same Malian anymore. She had finally learned that being calm didn't mean being weak. Being kind didn't mean being powerless. And walking away didn't always mean you had lost. Sometimes it meant you had finally decided what you were worth.